Excellent. Okay, so let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abdurrahman Khamis, and today I have the honor to host John Boero, which probably I mispronounced your last name, but that we'll get to. John is originally from Chicago, but currently residing in London. Over the course of 2 decades, he's been providing consulting services to some of the world's largest financial institute and public organization. He knows Linux very well, that I can testify to, and the cloud and HPC stuff as well. And he traveled across the globe, serving clients like NASA, Saudi Aramco, and so many more. John, welcome to the show.
Abdulrahman, thank you so much. You should I'll get my Arabic right anyway. I have just a very small amount, thanks to some of the reps that I've worked with over the years. But thank you for having me.
So that's the introduction that I stole from your LinkedIn profile, and I asked ChatGPT to play with it. So that's the horrible ones. Now I want to hear from you. How do you usually go about introducing yourself?
Absolutely. Well, that is the CV, the introduction in front of a group of people that need to establish your credibility, right? In fact, I consider myself just a lucky fool, right? I've got humble upbringings on a farm and got into the tech scene fairly early and was lucky enough to eventually find myself as a traveling consultant for some of the best companies in the world, like so Red Hat and a couple of ones that you mentioned as well. And then through that network, when I moved to the UK, became kind of part of the DevOps traveling group that has spread around all the vendors over the last couple of years. So I worked at Puppet. I recently left HashiCorp over 5.5 years. And I'm about to, I'm not supposed to announce it yet, but I'm about to start something new in November. So I've had a nice summer off and I'm finally getting back into things. So I'm very active in the open source community, as from the blog post as well. And, I can explain the last 20 years what I think works and what I think does not.
That's very cool. If I may ask, what get you moving from the US to the UK?
Fun story. I was 100% travel from North America when I was at Red Hat. And that meant that I got to not just travel for work, but also, take trips away. And I would often find that it's cheaper for the customer to send me to the Caribbean for the weekend than sending me home. So I'll go to Cancun. And I met my wife at the time, a Brit living in London. So and within 2 years I moved over. So it was all for love that I moved over. And now I'm a dual citizen, so I'm here and I'm basically back and forth quite a bit.
Cool. So you got a family back in Chicago, I assume, and right?
Yeah. Actually, not just Chicago, but all over the U.S. Probably between Washington State, and friends as well. So in fact, when I took off in June, July, when I left HashiCorp, that gave me some time to go back and visit some family, spend a couple of weeks back there, and kind of reconnect with a family that I've spent so much time away from. So yeah.
That's pretty cool. I can tell that you have so many relationships around the world. I was watching the other day a vlog you were doing on the AHL, which we'll get to, and I see the time zones like on the desktop.
Yeah, this is funny because I use because I'm from Red Hat. I'm very active in the Fedora community still, and I use KDE, and especially when I was working with HashiCorp, working for an American company in Europe, even with customers and partners in Saudi or even APJ in Australia, I always have a clock up there for each time zone. And you can mouse over those clocks and it'll switch between the time zones that I've picked out. Okay, which city? I've got to talk to the guy in Melbourne. What time is it in Melbourne? So very, very handy feature to have. It's a global world right now, right? You have to be global. And I've been lucky enough to get around.
Absolutely. That's really cool. So I was checking, I was while prepping for this, I was checking your early career, and I noticed that you did software engineering, application support, and that kind of stuff. So I was wondering, when was the time you started to meet customers and get on the technical sales kind of scene?
Sure, absolutely. Well, if you go way back to university days, right? I mean, I was 19 years old and I was helping both people and faculty with platforms. In fact, I went to school in Milwaukee, UW Milwaukee, which is north of Chicago. And back in the day, that was an active science cluster, right? And Chicago area has Fermilab, which is, used to be the world's biggest particle accelerator and physics lab. And then Milwaukee donated compute time to that, and LIGO as well. So they had a kind of an HPC cluster that we would do, administered by some students and part of the IEEE Computer Science Association Club that were in Milwaukee. So I actually spent more time with customers in university than when I became an engineer, because you get to be an engineer, you sit in a cubicle, you have some coding tasks, you follow an agile methodology, and that's it, right? So it was so much more fun. I ended up taking a DBA contract because I was so into Linux at the time, and very much in a .NET world at that time. I took a great opportunity with the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, the largest healthcare network in the U.S., to be a DBA for them on a Oracle and Linux stack. So after that, when I got the call from Red Hat, that was really the springboard, right? So that was when I would be in front of a new customer every week, and with a new problem to solve, which was, I think, the most fun you could have. Here's your plane ticket. Go solve this problem. You're reading the book on the plane on the way there. It's like, oh, I haven't worked with this product in 6 months. What's the latest on it? So you have to follow the changelog on the plane while you're getting headed to the customer. That was always the most fun, kind of like a drop-in parachute man to help solve a problem. Yeah. And that was, my gosh, oh, wow, 10 plus years ago now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So all like so since the early on, like you were like working with customers, and this was kind of always in a post sales kind of thing, like support, or
No.
when it.
Yeah. Well, and from the blog, I've experienced both sides of this, right? I've experienced the engineering side, the purely technical side, the pre-sales side, which kind of straddles the technical and the customer, and the services, the consulting. How do I actually deliver this? And I've never been full pre-sales. I don't consider myself really. I wouldn't like to be full sales and engagement, right? I wouldn't like to. When you're in sales, money is great. The potential for success is great, but the way I see it, you kind of lack the privilege of opportunity, and an opinion, right? You don't get to say, well, actually, this isn't a good fit for you. When you're in sales, here's what I have. You need it, no matter what, right? That is what the role of sales is. And technical sales, it's your job there to stand in the middle and say, actually, well, this part does what you need. This part does not. Let's be honest. If you buy something from the sales rep, and it doesn't do what you want, that's not going to be a good experience for the customer. So I've always liked to sit in the middle, and in particular now with the partner world, which enables me to go and travel. And now I've never dreamed of going to Riyadh or Saudi as a kid, but now I've been there 4 times, which I have no idea how lucky I've been to do that. But it's a great community we have, right? Not just customers, but partners and ecosystem like yourselves.
Indeed. Cool. So let me mention the story that I thought like about doing this podcast with you. Like a couple of months ago, you wrote this wonderful post about how to build a career in open source, right? And there you touched on building products, choosing career path, importance of showing up. So let's start, like take us a couple of steps back and ask you just what triggered you to write that in the first place.
Sure. Well, I had a draft of that building for years, actually a couple of years. The notes you would tell yourself if you were younger. I always wanted to say, okay, if I reach a milestone in my career, just hitting about 20 years right now in my career, what would I give advice to someone who's 20 years old today, right? To start over. And in your career path, you think of you're either very technical, you're getting a computer science degree, you're learning how to code low level or middleware. You're thinking about apps, you're thinking about what you want to do with yourself, or maybe you have your idea that you want to launch as the next big thing. You need to understand the relationships between the product, between the sales, and between the services, right? Because software products, I like to think a classic economics course, you learn about margin cost, right? Okay, in manufacturing, you build something. What's your margin cost to make one more and sell it to a customer? Software world, that doesn't apply, right? Margin cost is copy paste, right? So information is easy to make a copy of, which is why I think the U.S. has done so well in the information age, right? It's not so practical to manufacture things in the U.S. right now, but information in the right type of software, distributed and monetized correctly, is the easiest thing to produce en masse, especially in the internet age, right? Now, I've kind of bounced back and forth during my career. In fact, I've gone from vendors having products to sell between service companies and vendors, what we call our partners or our consultancies. Going back now to a consultancy. So I'm going back from here's my product, you need my product, and we'll find a way to make you need my product, to what is the best solution for the customer. And usually that will be a combination of products. So it is a bit more challenging. You have to keep more wide perspective on the ecosystem. Like these types of products do that. Security products you need are here. The workflow products and collaboration products are here. So there's a lot more to learn, a lot more to keep track of. But then the customer really gets closer to you, right? You are there to represent the customer, save them money, save them time, and hopefully make enough to make it worth their while off of that deal. So it'll be interesting to go back into being between the vendors and the customers, because you get so much more conversation going, right? And it's fun because I can remember interviewing younger in my days where it would be like, you've been a consultant, you've been all over the place, not in one place for a long time. We don't like that. We like someone who's been, in a long-term development job for 5 years. And I think there's a company that wants a person who's never seen anything else, right? Never experienced the other ways things are done. And part of the aspects of consultancy that are so amazing is you get to see how everybody solves their problem, right? And as you move on to the next one, you get to take that with you. So I would be in San Francisco one week, I would be in Atlanta the next week, New York, and then suddenly NASA. And I always would gather pieces, learn something new along the way, and be able to bring that experience with me to the next customer. You're not so much learning on the job, but every now and then you'll see a customer do something that really like is a light bulb in your head. Oh, that's a good shortcut. That's a good tip. I'll use that later. And it is, in my opinion, the most fun you can have, right? Anywhere.
Absolutely. Actually, that brings us to the travel, like the advice in this post about you advising anyone, like just like you should travel, you need to show up and that kind of stuff. So personal experience, I've tried traveling, let's say early on in my career. It was the best thing that I did.
Yeah.
But on, let's say a personal side, it almost ended my marriage, kind of.
Okay? Exactly. You bring that up perfect, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And now I have kids. Like I have 3 right now. It's just so difficult. So
exactly,
help me out here. Like, what's like now growing up? Like, is this like you advise it for like a early on in your career, or how do you go about that?
Yes. So this is great. There's a very narrow point in your life where you can do this, right? And you should fully take advantage of it. People that fly in someone from 1,000 miles away to solve a problem, they don't want the newbie. They don't want the person who just graduated from university, right? They want someone with some experience and some usually representation from a company that is reputable. Again, so Red Hat is everywhere. And if Red Hat sends you, they trust that person is going to be an authority on the topic, whether you are or not, right? So it is this perfect opportunity while you're young and single. And then obviously people who get married, that have kids, that doesn't become an option anymore. You usually would progress into either management or sales at that point, right? Or even engineering. If you're still purely technical, you may decide I need to work from home remotely and be an engineer again. That's kind of, in a great world that has all that available to you. If you work at a company that has a product, that has delivery for that product, we have consultants that would deliver for Puppet, for HashiCorp. They could also change careers and say, I've got a child now, I need to be an engineer, a stay at home, or I need to focus on my region and be a sales rep, right? Obviously, everybody thinks success is about management. For me, I never aspired to deal with the politics of management, right? Maybe it's a slight autism spectrum. I have no idea, but I'd love to be down in the bits, the low level tech of things, right? And solving the actual problem rather than sitting in meetings. So, I mean, what about you? I mean, have you thought about what's next for you? When you're married, you have kids now, you're not traveling. Actually, your experience, I can see you've got some management, right? You've been a VP of product, you've had some. Can you tell me about that? What are your thoughts?
So I think this is what I've been I've been technical most of my career, right? And I got this opportunity to go into the management track, which is obviously like way more money, right?
Yeah.
And then like you get into that, the day started, and like end of day, you are exhausted, you're not satisfied, and it's not like fun. But like I had other jobs where like it doesn't feel like a job, right? Although the
Yes.
money is way, way better than like tech, let's say, jobs. But I've tried that for a couple of years, but I feel like it didn't work for me, right?
Yeah.
And after like accomplishing some milestones in life that is important to me and my family, I decided to let's say take like do a career shift and go back to technical again, working with customers, which it's been like almost a year now since we like met last year. I feel like yeah, this is where I belong. This is what I want to do. What I want to do. But I don't know now if let's say like 10 years from now or 15 years from now, can I still do this or will I get bored? I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's the luxury of having change, right? You can change when you need to if the market really is ready for you, right? And I love again, and I shared on that blog post my favorite Mr. Burns quote from The Simpsons. Talking to kids about business and like family, religion, friendship. These are the three demons you must slay if you want to succeed in business. And it's obviously twisted, but it's actually true. There's some truth to that, right? Your family, when you're in management, doesn't get to see you, just almost like you're traveling, right? So I think work-life balance is everything, right? Don't sell your soul for the top position in a company, I think, because that'll end up leaving you unfulfilled, like you say. Um,
Absolutely. You mentioned something here, in your career, you said I knew that I wasn't cut for sales, right? So what I want to so basically what you said, like I wasn't cut for like being a sales rep, right? So I want to know from you, like what was the stuff that uh like kind of you realized that yeah, I don't want to do this.
sure. Well, and I wouldn't say I would never do it, but from what I could see from salespeople I've worked with, and I've worked with some very nice salespeople, some maybe questionable salespeople, never anybody that I couldn't stand. Generally, they're a lot of fun, but some of the some of the interactions you see in the sales and some of the backhanded deals or under the table deals that are made in the sales, I can't stomach, right? I'm not about to do something questionable or compromise my integrity to land a deal. There are good opportunities, and in fact, it's funny to see salespeople interview. And again, you go into an interview with a company you don't know much about, but this is the product. Everybody has to have it. How do you sell it? And to them, it's all about salesmanship, right? It has nothing to do with whether the product is actually any good. So I love going into an interview about here's a new vendor that's going to do this. And I take my three tenets, right? Okay, did you name your company after your first product? You are doomed, right? Products go out of style. You will be questionably compromised, or you will be searching for VC or the next round within a year. Did you anything else that's shady? Did you have a purely technical founder? And Puppet, I think, was a perfect example of that, where great product, named themselves after the first product, though, and the founder, Luke Knies, who's super brilliant guy, very nice guy, was so technical that he didn't know how to run a business, right? So, and I contrast that against HashiCorp. We had the perfect balance of Armand Edgar and Mitchell Hashimoto, kind of as a Jobs and Wozniak figures, right? So we had a technical person in Mitchell Hashimoto, we had a commercial person in Armand Edgar, and both of them are realizing this is a great company we've got. We got multiple products. They tick that box. We're young and we don't know how to run a company. Let's get in some professional help to lead the business. And they've done that very well. And I think anything that I see in a company, or I show up at a company and I ask them, show me your sales pitch this product to me, pretend I'm a customer during an interview. And if I'm not completely enthralled and I don't see the technical value. I could not turn around and repeat this to somebody. I don't see myself doing it. And if you're truly good salesmanship, if you have all that salesmanship and you have that ability to spin anything, that's not a problem, right? So we've seen some salespeople arrive at a company with the perfect product, and it doesn't matter how good of a salesperson they are, right? They walk in the door. Early days of some of the vendors that I've worked with, walk in the door into a bank in London, and they know the product, they want to buy it. And then the sales rep obviously gets this massive commission, right? Like you walked into this deal. It was timing, and it was the fact that it was a good product, not necessarily good salesmanship. And conversely, we've seen some questionable products where we see a really good salesperson walk in and either convince the customer of the value, which may be a long-term goal or something that's difficult for the customer to think about long-term, and then they will actually truly close the deal through salesmanship. And neither one of those sounds appealing to me. That's just so risky and so not my technical sense, right? So there's a show I think that was in the U.S. called *Halt and Catch Fire* that was about the mainframe days and a relationship between sales and pre-sales. And a lot of our salespeople love it and live by it. So if anybody's never seen it, I recommend it. I don't know, it's like their kind of mantra, but it's enough of an example that I don't see myself getting into a fully sales-oriented job.
I see. Same here. Same here. Actually, I took a few BOs where like I felt, okay, I cannot do this like as a like full-time job, because I totally respect sales. I respect salesmanship, as you said. There is a couple of great salespeople out there, and even in the boss you touched, like it's very hard to stay, let's say, to balance, like from not, let's say, lying, from being honest. It's just like a very gray area that you need to be careful.
Yeah, and that's a good interview tactic as well. We've used pretty much every vendor we've been at, right? If you interview someone, you ask them questions until you find something they don't know, and if they try to make something up, that's it. Like if you do that to a customer, you are done. You cannot make something up. So that's a really good interview tactic, and I guess also a life kind of tactic if you're dealing with reading people. So yeah, this isn't poker. This is something with a customer involved, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So what's your thought about like sales? Let's say like if you work a very techy company and you worked for a couple, how technically you think should be the sales rep?
Well, in a perfect world, I think some of the best sales reps I've worked with have started out as pre-sales like me, but they knew that they were ready for sales. And again, they go in with a perfectly good foundation of technical understanding, and the rest they can ask the SE, right? They can ask the pre-sales engineer, what's the latest on this? What's the latest on that? And the other aspect that really makes a good salesperson, I hate to say, is experience in your region, right? So if you walk in with a Rolodex, these are all the people I know at all these banks that I've sold to already in a previous life, previous job. That is a sure hire, right? Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily matter the quality of the salesmanship or anything. If there's a great candidate who's young, that will always be hard to beat, right? Maybe you're a young person just starting out. HashiCorp early on had some sales reps that were 23, 25 years old, just out of university. And again, the timing was right. They did well. These days, you're going to hire experience, right? So not many people will find an entry-level position, I don't think, at vendors these days. It's pretty tough, right? So I think it's a good progression to start technical, get into pre-sales, and then figure out if you want to go sales, if you want to stay technical. And again, in my experience, the best salespeople I think I've seen have started out in a technical role, and they know the foundations of what makes a good technical product when they sell it.
That's very cool. In the post you stressed on the fact that about like the importance of showing up, and you're saying it's not actually about what you know and about your skills. It's about like just being there. And
yes.
So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, this is so many times this happened, especially again in my service days at Red Hat. You don't have kids, or at the time I wasn't married, did not have kids. You are maybe not the best at the product, but if the customer needs someone on site and you're the one, you have to be there, right? And again, it's my favorite experience was when they called me up to go to NASA and install the International Space Station failover. So this is in the days before Oracle database could be on VMs. It has still to be architected on physical machines. And there's a DC in Houston. There's a DC for failover in Alabama. And if there's a hurricane headed towards Houston, guess what? The ISS isn't going to pause. It still needs to be maintained. So they hit a switch, and they all pack up and go to Alabama, the backup data center. So they were having trouble with that. They called me in, and I was nervous. I said, "This is NASA. I'm not the best person at this product. You should get Mike." Mike was the guy who taught me that. And they said, "Oh yeah, we sent Mike. They didn't like him." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So Mike is the best guy, but they didn't like him because I don't think he knew Oracle very well. So they sent me, and had a blast, had the most amazing time, a real great customer. And again, I was not the expert, but I knew the software, I knew Oracle, and I was the one that was available to show up. So I made the most of it, and it was the best thing ever, right? Again, a lot of people, if maybe the engineers for the failover or for the products working on this are home with family or with kids or don't have the ability to show up, they're probably the smartest person in the room, right? But you don't have to be the smartest person if you're not in the room, right? You have to be the one that is in the room. So I know things are maybe a little different now with the remote working. I know quite a bit of travel plans have been restricted or pulled back, but you just have to be the one that's available. And again, I started out, like you said, in the engineering side. I really wanted to get into the open source and Linux side because that is what I had done since I was in university. And when the opportunity came up, I couldn't say no, right? You pretty soon you find that you are the one authority in this topic just because you've always tried to push yourself to that. So who is it? Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson has this great quote. You don't have to know everything about the job during the interview, but you can learn on the job, right? And make sure that you pick up those skills along the way. It sounds maybe a little cheap to think about learning on the job, but absolutely. I mean, experience is a chicken and egg problem, right? Do you have the skills? Do you have the experience? If you can find a way to get those both at the same time, either through an apprenticeship, and again, I've had so many great advisors over the years, or via really just learning on the fly. And like I said, reading tech manuals on the flight, on the way to a customer, because I haven't touched this product in a long time, or I haven't worked up with this at all. I need to study it on the way. Really, I mean, just be there and be honest and say, yes, I'm a little bit shaky on this, but this is what I know, and explain it to people. They generally are pretty understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't add more. And I guess also this goes back to hiring as well. Like when you hire a person, or like we want that person to join the company, it's not about the skill itself. It's about like the whole package, the attitude that if we have this person and we know how he works or how she works, that matters as well. So sometimes we tend to beat ourselves that saying, well, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, right?
Right.
So
right.
I wouldn't have a shot at this, or like there is a X and Y that they would take all the job in the world. But I think it all goes back to like you as a person have, let's say, like people like receive you differently, right? And with the knowledge that you have, with showing up and being there, like I read like in your headline, like you can be in LinkedIn, you said like, I can show up at your office in downtown London, right? And
Yes.
I think this is smart because like if I know John and I'm in downtown London, I would love like if he can bob on the office. That matters, right?
Exactly. And recruiters, especially now, and there's obviously a tech lull right now, right? The whole market compared to 2 years ago is drastically different. And just having that in there, like, I can show up at your office. People don't, don't see that on a CV. Like, oh, I see your experience. I see so they assume you're going to work remotely. Like, no, I'm literally 2 blocks away from half the banks in London. Oh, okay. That makes a difference, especially when that's what people are asking for. People come back to the office, right? Some companies are swinging the other way. In fact, just today, Facebook Meta broke their lease in London. They closed their office, so 140
Oh,
million.
really?
Oh yeah, that was big news. 140 million pounds to break their lease and get out of their office. Not their only office, I don't think. I think they have multiple. But one of
Okay.
their major offices in London, they said, you know what, people aren't showing up, so let's close it. So there's that, but not everybody's there yet, right? Also, HSBC just left Canary Wharf or is leaving Canary Wharf. So a lot of these big buildings are about to be abandoned, but there's still plenty of people that just want someone at the office. And especially with me, yes, like you said, in the heart of London, I want to get out and go see people in person, right? So yeah, just be the one that shows up and be the one that makes sure that they know can show up as well. And you're right about attitude, because the last maybe 5 years, 6 years, I've just kind of maybe overworked, and my attitude, I like to say I've become a bit of a cranky old man. Like if there's something done in a new trendy way that I disagree with, I say, okay, well, wait, this way is so much easier. And if it doesn't tick all the right trends, a lot of people think I'm being negative. So yes, don't say no. Say, in fact, we had this great sales training, which we called QBS, or question-based training, question-based sales, from a man in the US, a man in Atlanta. And why show up on a customer site? Why do I show up at your site and speak to you nonstop, right? That does nothing for you. Like, I should be able to ask you questions. What is your problem? What is your challenge? How can I help? And really, that curiosity, I think, not only can I show up in your office, but I can listen to what you have problems with. That is really what people want to hear. And there's nothing, like you say, in my background, I still love to do HPC and performance tuning, because that was what I did with the large database specialty. There's no more fun to me than showing up and saying, we've got this supercomputer, it runs something in 15 seconds, and we need it to run in 14 seconds. And in fact, my first trip to Saudi, actually, to Dammam, such a small world. Ibrahim Al-Faris, working at Saudi Aramco, I think you know him, yeah.
Amazing guy. Yeah.
He's a really cool guy, yeah. And I show up out of the blue in a panic, in an emergency, about two weeks before my wedding, when I moved to the UK.
Wow.
Yeah, Red Hat says we need someone out at Saudi now to fix this. And oh shoot, this is going to be awful. Not for the fact that I have to do it, but the timing of my wedding. And Ibrahim greets me really nicely. He says, "Oh yeah, I know. I did an internship at Red Hat. I know your project manager. Oh yeah, we're all good friends. Like, such a small world. The fact that there's Saudi people that share friends with me is amazing. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
an interesting time.
Indeed. Okay, so before we close this, let's say, career chapter, you mentioned something about, let's say, picking a niche skills, right? Like specializing in something. And I wanted to understand that, because now you have like different schools. You have like a school of like Jack of all trades, master of none, like especially
Sure.
like there is a lot of softwares around there. Like even like you have the cloud providers, you have the automation tools. It's just like so many ISVs around there, right? And picking up a niche to, like, how do you approach that? Is it something that, like, by if you got the opportunity and or you feel this is something that you should focus on, or is it something that you actively look for? How does it work?
Yeah, well, there's two sides to this for me, at least, right? There's the professional side and the personal side. Like, so here's what the industry wants me to do. Here's what the trend is, and here's what I actually love to do, right? So this is a balance of, in my mind, people going out and calling themselves a full stack engineer. Like, oh, full stack engineer, so you know everything, but right, like from the hardware up. Like, yeah. So you took a 2-year degree and you understand some Python and maybe some Ruby. So can you fine tune this real-time kernel for 2 NUMA nodes in an HPC environment? And they just draw blank. What is this? Like, there's no such thing as a fully rounded full stack developer, right? And to be fair, I can do all that. I can high performance tune a system, high performance tune a network, QoS, quality service on the network. But ask me to write the next app in I don't know, in Objective-C on an iPhone or something like that. That's not me. I'm not going to be able to do that, right? So I'm more generalist towards the bottom. I guess there's a little bit of a spectrum that you might want to place yourself on. Are you near the bottom and the low level of the OSI, or are you at the top where you're writing some JavaScript and suddenly you've got the next Uber, right? I still love to be at the raw level, speaking machine code and object code. And in my mind, there's two, it's maybe less of a spectrum, and there's two real sides to it, right? There's scripters or there's object code writers, right? So are you writing machine code, or are you writing a script that the machine has to read? And that doesn't mean one is better than the other. I can be a Linux expert today and make a fairly good living. Or I could take a 2-week course on JavaScript and cloud native, Lambdas or Google Cloud Run, and have the next Uber, and suddenly I'm a billionaire. So I think it's not right or wrong. It's just know where you are, I think. And again, if the industry wants, DevOps in this case, or DevOps tooling, or a DevOps partner, in which case I'm getting to, then that is my industry interest. My personal interest, I go home at night, if it's a rainy day or rainy weekend, I may still code some OpenCL or some GPU code or AI, right? So a lot of the open source projects that I've been working with this summer in my free time, AI and machine learning, Llama, so Facebook's LLM that you can run locally, which is open source. A lot of stuff that maybe won't make a lot of money, but is really interesting to me, and it's good to have in my skills belt, right? So I think pick your interest, pick your personal interest, and pick your professional interest. And if you're lucky, they both align. If you're not, I think you'll be happy anyway, right? You'll have a day job that keeps you gainfully employed, and you'll also have your interest, which may or may not then translate into its own business, right? So they say, love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life. That's the goal, really.
Yeah. And some people would say that's cheesy, but I actually believe it. Actually,
Yes.
because I've tried like, at least let's say if I think if you are lucky, if you like, if at least 50% of what you do doesn't suck, right? If 50% is like you find it interesting in a way, you're
Yes.
lucky.
Yes, that's the threshold for you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's true. And you know what? Work should only be a fraction of your life in the first place too. So that's okay. As long as the rest of your life is happy. Absolutely. There's no reason.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One thing on this career chapter, like I'm quoting here, like you said, like, don't be afraid to leave a job that doesn't feel right. The company would replace you in a month and your skills are valuable somewhere else.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean?
I can. In fact, some real world examples, some of the early HashiCorp joiners that came on, and in the early days, everything's great. There's a few people you work with. You show up at a company event and everybody knows everybody, right? Eventually, as your company grows, not just HashiCorp, but a couple different companies, I've seen one or two engineers that have been around since the very beginning, either burning out or frustrated with their management, right? And called me in a panic, like, John, what do I do? My manager's driving me crazy. I don't know if I can go on. Like their life is ending. It's like, okay, calm down. It's just a job, right? Company would replace you and you can replace the company. So don't have your loyalty so tied up in a company that it's making your life miserable, right? It's always possible to move on and be happier somewhere else. Again, work-life balance, this is not the end of your life. You don't have to spend your entire life at one job like you did maybe 50 years ago or 60 years ago, right? I interview candidates that have changed jobs every 6 months to a year or the last 10 years. I don't know how they do it, but in this industry today, that's acceptable, right? Whereas 10 years ago, it's like, oh, you've hopped around too much. These days, and especially times of feast instead of famine, you need the talent. It doesn't matter how much they switch. You need it now. Hire them. So yeah, don't worry. If you're miserable at your job, find another job. Absolutely. The company is being born and unborn, I should say, every couple of weeks here now. So there's always a good opportunity somewhere.
Excellent. Couldn't agree more. Cool. So let's shift a gear a bit. I would like to talk about your book writing experience. So you wrote a book about Becker, right?
Yes, that's right. Thank you for the plug.
Yeah. So just like let's take a couple of steps back on the creative side. Like, why a book? Why not a blog? How was that writing experience, self-publishing, all that?
Sure.
Like, tell me the full story.
Sure, absolutely. Now, we have a pretty vivid Medium blog series from back at HashiCorp that I had contributed to many times, and publishers occasionally would reach out. And we saw your blog, we'd like you to write a book, and usually about core products, right? Vault, Terraform. Well, there's two problems with that, right? First of all, core product, very important to HashiCorp. It needs to be perfect. You need to be the expert. Number two, that means that you need to have legal permission from the company. And obviously, once all that is said and done, the effort required for that would be massive, right? It's going to be a full-time job writing that book. I had been approached probably 2 or 3 times in the beginning of COVID. I said, actually, I won't do one in Terraform or Vault because A, there's hundreds of books out already, and everybody wants to write a book about those. But Packer has been majorly rewritten, and nobody's put a book out for Packer in like 6 years. Can I do that? And it's a free product, so legal's never going to say no, right? It's just a community contribution. Donate the profits to charity or any commissions to charity. And I thought it would be fun to do, be in print. So I wasn't even, I mean, I had used Packer, but I wasn't even an expert at the time. I just thought it deserved some love and some attention to be published again. So I ended up deep diving for what I thought would be half a year. Publishers, edits, and so on, and difficulties with they used SharePoint, Microsoft SharePoint, which, oh, gosh, it's been so many years since I used it, and it's still awful. No offense to anybody that loves SharePoint, but it's not a great writing tool for this case. But delays and delays later, I think it took over a year. I deep dived so much into Packer that I learned some stuff that even the Packer team wasn't quite aware about. And I wrote some code examples. I'm like, okay, using HCL2, using the new Packer style, how do I do this? And even some of the Packer team in the Slack were like, oh, I didn't realize you could do that. Well, that's part of the features of the language now. So it's really kind of interesting, the features that I came across. And I also wrote it such that kids that are starting out in coding could be able to use it just as well as someone in a cloud profession, right? So anything you write there can be run on anything from a laptop, or built anything from a laptop to a cloud VM to even a Raspberry Pi. So it's entirely architecture agnostic. You can run it on whatever you have available. So if you have a kid's PC or an old laptop, experiment with it, build with it. And again, those skills translate directly into the cloud. So if you're planning on turning that into a career, there you go, easy win. So we have, again, some of the biggest banks in the UK, in London, using Packer every day. It's a free product. Again, it's not something that is really monetized at all. There's the HCP Packer side, again, the managed SaaS, managed service for tracking metadata. But there's no real need to have an enterprise Packer as a tool, right? It sees what you want as code, it delivers the images, and it inserts well into a pipeline. So whether you're amateur, professional, one of the major banks in the world, it's a great tool, and it's free. So go ahead, and if you snag the book, again, any commissions go to Raspberry Pi Foundation for kids. So that's not about money. It was just about the fun of it.
Pretty cool. Pretty cool. So how does it feel like you wrote something? I assume like you did like hundreds of hours on it. This thing like could be like in 10 years that's like just obsolete, right? Like it has no value. So how does it feel like writing in tech? How does it feel like if you know this like in 10 years could mean nothing, right?
Yeah, someone who from experience has boxes of old O'Reilly books that are obviously obsolete. I remember thinking every chapter like, oh, this is how it is today, but it's obsolete by the time it hits the shelf, right? In fact, between the first draft and the editing, which was about 3 weeks of the HCP chapter, they had completely rewritten and replaced the HCP platform for Packer, and I thought, so it was all broken. I said, I hate to say print is dead, but I sure miss writing a blog where I can go post an update later and say, hey, actually, this has changed. And luckily, again, there's a EPUB versions, there's Kindle versions. I don't know if they'll let me submit updates, but you always have the Git repo available. Again, the Git repo is public, whether or not you have the book. So if the examples change or need updating, that is always there. Yeah, print is tough. And I come from, my mom's side of the family comes from Paper Mill Town, USA, right? So they were basically raised making paper. And now the whole industry is down, and books are, I hate to say that it's a tough sell, but I still love the fact that you have no batteries and you're able to sit down quietly and read a book like that. Anyway, you have any medium you choose, you can pick it up electronically or in paperback. But you're right, it's tough. Paper and print is a difficult medium today.
I always like I have like a shelf next to me right here, and whenever like I like some books, even a tech box that like made an impact on me, I try always to go and get the print copy. It just like
Oh, good.
yeah, it just like feels so good, to have it there is nothing beats paper. Obviously now with like having like limited spaces, traveling, that makes it very difficult actually to move books and so on.
Absolutely. And I do love Kindle, I hate to say, or just not any Kindle, but an e-reader, right? In fact, that you can take your entire life's books with you and without the pop-ups, without the browser issues or the system updates of an actual laptop or anything like that. Yeah, e-readers are very nice. Yeah, but you're right.
Yeah,
I mean, in fact, my shelf is right there, and I look at a lot of that with fond memories as well. So, you're right.
that's cool. So nowadays, so I found the AI chill. Um, uh, Tell us a bit about it. Like,
Sure.
yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. No, again, because I was completely independent and had the summer off, I thought, what would I want to write for fun? And I remember thinking, why do all these LLMs now have their own API? Why is there not? And of course, everything is designed for the web, right? Like, what about the CLI? Why is there no simple CLI for all of these? It's a simple transaction, right? You're doing a chat. So I started to write a minimalist shell, right? When I write code these days, I don't try to make a huge project. I try to make as few lines as possible, which is probably a bad style guide for a lot of people. But in something like 300 lines of code, how can I write a CLI that will be expandable with plugins to say, okay, talk to Google Bard, talk to ChatGPT, and use the exact same interface, right? So there's no real change in the experience. And when Meta released Llama and Llama 2 in particular, that made it even more interesting because again, not every customer that I deal with is in the cloud, right? There's a lot of banks, a lot of government institutions in particular that like, no, I'm never going to touch the cloud. Like, I hate to say, here's the ugly truth about cloud. I can say this now, I'm independent again. What's the one guaranteed way that you will never be in the headlines for your cloud being hacked? There's only one way you can do this, and that is to not have a cloud, right? Not have your data in the cloud. Microsoft, of all people, leaked how many gigabytes of data on their own customers last week, and it's like this is not something that happens through stupidity. This is human, right? This is even expert professionals with experience make mistakes. HashiCorp leaked cloud keys quite often, right? So a lot of people still prefer an on-premise AI, and in fact, the fact that I can now have an air-gapped LLM with swappable modules that are also free and open source to say, okay, become a code specialist. Okay, become a general history specialist. And I can use that on any network or air-gapped network, and then now have a CLI interface to it, which you can what now is a version 0.2 talk back to you. So it'll read the responses back to you in a voice. What I'm doing now actually is adding Whisper, which is the other Meta voice recognition LLM, which is kind of based on the same models as their Llama, to be able to take your voice in. So it'll be a fully featured voice assistant, air-gapped, right, anywhere on any network, which is amazing. And I applaud Meta for doing that, for releasing that open source, because again, quality-wise, I still love ChatGPT. I still love Google Bard. I think is actually underrated. I think it's come a long way as well. But you need to have that cloud account and access, and you also get billed for it, right? So the fact that you can now do this on your own anywhere is really impressive. So to unify that with a single CLI, which you can also do with voice, is something I thought that would be very useful.
Nice. While developing this, have you used like ChatGPT or Bard? Like,
yeah, regularly, and testing with it as well. And again, with the latest release 0.2, and again, this is pure open source. I'm never going to monetize this. It's just a fun little app to write. If you start out a command or start out a line of text with the next LLM, if you say, Bard, can you explain the noble gases to me, right? Not a coding question, just a general question. It'll respond, okay, great. And then wait, actually, something doesn't look right. And usually it's the other way around. Usually it's a llama, which is a limited model, getting something wrong. In fact, llama is great with facts, but it doesn't do math right. So you say, dear llama, what's 10 times 550? And it'll be wrong. And you say, Bard, what do you think? and it'll automatically switch LLMs, run the whole conversation past Bard, and Bard will say, actually, Llama is wrong. The answer is this.
Wow.
Yeah, which is kind of fun, actually, because you get to see the whole group chat between the LLMs. And you say, ChatGPT 3.5, what do you think of this? And ChatGPT 4 will say, actually, I have different thoughts. So it's really interesting, just a simple, powerful way to say, okay, get a second opinion.
Yeah.
Because I hate to say this is embrace this or not. This is what's happening next in the industry, right? This is what's going to be the next thing to do in a career.
How it's going to affect, let's say, us? We are like be in the, let's say, cloud / HPC world. Like,
Yeah.
how's that going to affect us?
Well, I think if you become a specialist in this, or if you again add this to your tools, which is pretty easy tool to use actually, it's going to help you. If you deny that it's coming for your job and you don't respect it, I think it's going to be a problem, right? It's actually just the beginning of COVID, when I had some friends reach out. They were trying to start a HashiCorp partner, and they said, yeah, there's actually about to be this release of something called ChatGPT 3, and it can write Terraform with human language. I'm like, okay. And they showed me, like, that's look really impressive, but how am I going to monetize it? And like, I'm thinking, okay, the next step in this is not asking it to write Terraform, but why do I need the Terraform? The next step is say, go out, run these CLI, run these cloud commands. Don't get my Terraform state, get the actual cloud state, and do what you need to make it happen. And in that case, it's not just the end of a DevOps team potentially, but the end of the tooling chain, right? So like a Ansible Terraform, why do I need that if the AI can do everything that does, right? It's the next step. Now, obviously, because it's error prone, our job will be to maintain, to supervise that, right? You need to be able to supervise what the AI is doing and say whether or not there's an error. So that part is not going away. And also security, right? So I always say that DevOps is one career path. DevSecOps, and adding that security aspect, which is vital, is about a 50% bump usually to your bottom line. And the security is not going away. I don't know any way to say, AI, can you make sure that my system is hacker proof, right? What does that mean, right? There's no model that magically will harden your systems against future attacks, right? So that still is a very human aspect to it. And again, that's one of the focuses that I'm going to maintain, is always security. As far as routine DevOps, I show again with chat with the AI shell that I was talking about, chatting to Bard, which requires your cloud credentials. All you have to say is, spin up this app for me in the cloud. Great. Okay. What size? And it does it. Like, again, there's no Terraform happening here. There's just it happening. And people say, well, there's no audit trail. I'm like, okay, hey Bard, what did you just do the last 24 hours? And it'll show you the audit trail. Like, this is silly. So it's really powerful. I wouldn't be intimidated by it, but I would embrace it and respect it, right? And again, the future challenge for AI, I think, will always be security, which is really the critical system here.
Absolutely. I liked so while browsing your YouTube channel, I like this mini let's say demos / vlogs like you do on that to showcase the demo. So what's your thought on that? Like, if you, like, for AIHL, for example, so you had two options. If like you could write about it, right? Or what you did, just like you went on, put your face on, showed like people how does it look, what's your thoughts around it. So what's your thoughts like on doing that versus this?
Now, do you mean that with respect to like a marketing it or pushing it, or do you?
No, I mean like from, let's say just like your thought process of writing that, like you could write a post about it, but instead you just show it in action, right? So what's your thought process?
Well, there's two things here. Again, who reads a changelog, right? Not many people, actually. Like, they want to know what features they want are addressed or fixed, but they don't necessarily read a changelog. So to have like a 2-minute video summary changelog, like, here's what's new, I thought was always nice. I always wished applications and products would have that a little better. And again, I hate to say, but a lot of these independent projects or indie products will announce on Hacker News or Reddit. It's funny because like these days, Slashdot or some of the old mediums, you post something amazing on and it doesn't hit the audience that it used to, right? People are looking on Hacker News or Hacker News or Reddit now. So if you want to impact the right audience or hit the right target audience, you have to be in the right spot. So it's one thing to have the right content, either a post or a video. It's another thing to put it in the right location. And again, because this is not something I'm planning to sell or monetize, it's pretty low key, but it's just fun to whip it together. Here's a changelog, 2 minutes. Here's the demo. Here's what it does. And in fact, in that demo, the ChatGPT JSON was malformed. I had an error. Like, shoot, I'll fix that. Sorry. And I didn't re-record it. I fixed it, but I didn't re-record that. Like, who cares? Just put it out.
I think it's actually awesome. Like, I like that. Like, some people said like, okay, just like waste of time to do that since you're not making any money out of it, but you are getting better. Like on that's a skill that what you just did, like doing with that. This could be like a customer, right?
Yeah. Well, excellent. Thank you. Yeah.
So I actually liked it. I use a tool. I'm sure. I don't know if you saw it or not. Like called Loom, like for cloud recording. Yeah. And I had to downgrade the other day, and I just noticed that I made like 500 videos with it, right?
Oops. Wow.
Yeah, that's so I was actually looking for like an open source tool, which I think you're using one, right? And I love that kind of communication. Even like if you're gonna share a screen, having the face, like seeing the face talks, like it just like makes a difference. It just
and I hate to say Zoom is great for a real-time conversation, but yeah, there's either a face or there's a presentation, right? So to literally all I was doing was screen recording, and then there's a Linux app called Cheese to show the webcam live, and I could drag myself around. It's very strange to talk through a product or talk through a demo and drag your face around on top of it. And also, like, I'm very low tech when is appropriate. Like during COVID, when a lot of people were doing these demos remotely, they all needed an iPad so they could whiteboard next to their screen. And I'm like, hey, first of all, I got a touch screen. So second of all, like I just have a second webcam over a piece of paper with markers. Like you don't need a fancy whiteboard app. You could just have markers and paper, because apps can go wrong. Like you said, the updates come in and Zoom is broken or something is broken. Like somebody doesn't have the right version, they can't see what you're doing. So yeah, low key is always not always, but low key is sometimes better, I think. Right, a lot less goes wrong with microphone and markers.
That's cool. Like, so actually, I don't know if you saw or not, but the latest iPhone camera actually can shoot like your desk.
Oh, it can. Excellent. And it will actually perspective correct. Oh, that's interesting. Huh?
Yes. So I actually, like, for now, for my setup, I'm using my iPhone for this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good camera quality. I thought, well, that's a good camera. So is that the 13?
I think the 12 or 13.
Oh, 12,
it's supported from like what they call the continuity camera, and it can do two things. It can do like using the rear camera, and second, that it can also do at the same time. You can like write or like do markers or whatever it is, right?
Oh,
which
on
is
the screen,
amazing. On the screen, yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know how they do it, but you just like they tell you where to draw in the space, like just on the desk, and it will just show it.
Oh, I see. Wow.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Honestly,
that's
like
smart.
Yeah. So you don't need like the tablet. I used to have an iPad that I don't need anymore. Just like I can just have a markers and just write on it.
Genius.
Actually, this brings me to something like, I remember like you went to, let's say, one customer that we both know. And I remember one guy who met you in the meeting, like he was surprised that you were running Fedora. Yeah. So I think you're like the few people that I know, like, let's say at least like in technical sales, who run outside, like outside of Red Hat people who run like Fedora for a work laptop.
Well, this is interesting because, well, a few reasons. Yeah, when I joined HashiCorp, you could still pick out your own laptop, and it's funny because I'm ex Red Hat, and I still love Fedora, contribute to Fedora, any bugs or packaging or issues. And literally, if something goes wrong, I know exactly who to call. I know exactly what what bit of code to go check out and actually submit a fix, right? And it's free. So like we've got new people showing up and they get an expensive MacBook, which I don't knock MacBooks, they're amazing, but then they need to buy Docker Desktop and they need to buy this and that. It's like, John, how did you buy Docker Desktop? Like I have Docker on my laptop. I don't know it runs Linux, so I have to talk to acquisition. It's like, everything just works. And guess what? Fedora people don't understand that when CentOS kind of was squashed by Red Hat, right? That was the basis for Amazon Linux, for essentially Facebook's Linux, right? And all of them have switched now to Fedora. Amazon Linux is based on Fedora, right? Meta or Facebook Linux, which is if somebody has a Linux on their laptop, that's Fedora, right? So this is the standard release for them. And the fact that Amazon Linux 2 or Amazon Linux 3, whatever next comes out, I know exactly because I use every day. And it's some of these newer Amazon Linuxes were released, and a lot of people that were on a MacBook didn't know how to update packages. Like, well, this is how this is how you do it in this version because it was based on Fedora. So that was the upstream. And it's not flawless. It's not without issues. Some things go wrong. Some things go wrong on people's expensive MacBooks too, right? I mean, Windows updates come in and they break things. It's software. It's not magic, right? So the difference is it's free. I know it inside and out. And I'm active in the community. I'm actually in a debate right now because they're about to deprecate a major feature of Fedora in 40, and I'm one of the defendants of the old tech, actually X Windows. So it's interesting. It's a great community. It really is. And again, it's one thing that's is fairly politically independent from Red Hat still. So yeah.
That's cool. Well, what's hardware out there that just like kind of out of the box compatibility with the Fedora desktop?
What I'm on right now, actually, this is an old Dell XPS. In fact, the one that I got when HashiCorp hired me, it was 5 years old. It came up for a hardware refresh. They were going to buy me a new laptop, but I said no, just give me a new battery. The battery is a little bit old, and I literally $35 got a new battery, and it's like a new machine, right? The touch screen worked from day one. The webcam worked from day one, even though it's in a terrible location. Everything just works. Dell and HP are very well connected with the Linux community, and I hate to say it's largely due to Intel. Actually, Intel is one of the biggest contributors to the Linux kernel, right? So all the support largely is due to Intel keeping up a good job on the software. So anything Dell XP today, especially if it ships with a Ubuntu option, it just works. It's actually fantastic.
Yeah. But actually, I used to back in the university days. I used to run Fedora. I don't know if it's. I'm embarrassed to say the version. I'm afraid that it will be wrong. But will it be like until around 2009, like 12?
Yeah, Fedora Core 12 or yeah, they switched from Fedora Core to then Fedora again. Yeah,
I had it on my Toshiba, it was so stable that like I think I had like one version like for for all the 4 or 5 years of the university. Just so stable, and they still have the laptop.
I bet.
Just amazing.
And it's not like when Microsoft says, "Oh, your machine is obsolete because you need a new one for Windows 11." Like it will always work, right? Yeah, as long as it's got the right BIOS options and whatnot. Yeah, it's a wonderful community, Linux community.
When I look to the Chromebox, I feel like some days like we'll have kind of, especially now with the ability of them running Linux on them. Like I feel we will have that laptop that kind of have like the business apps. Also, it allows you to do Linux. It's just like the perfect, let's say, desktop out there.
Yes, well, in fact, some of the new Chromebooks, which are ARM-based, it's great because guess what? Fedora and Ubuntu still treat ARM as a first-class citizen, right? So you can run, Fedora just about on any hardware. The new interesting thing is this RISC-V coming out, right? So they finally released a RISC-V laptop, I think in China somewhere. And are you familiar with RISC-V? So
no, I'm not.
So this is the new up-and-coming chip. So the RISC chip for open source. So open source is now going from software into the CPU. So like RISC concepts have been around for years. Why is this a secret? It's not really. So IBM and a couple of companies like IBM was behind RISC and Power architecture, right? Eventually, they all spun an association together called RISC-V. So this is basically like an open source ARM. And in fact, ARM just had a really successful IPO in the US, but a lot of people don't know about RISC-V, and that is going to be their big rival, I think, in the next couple of years, right? because it's cheaper. And in the end, cheaper usually wins, right? So if you can have a chip in your phone or your laptop that is simple, a RISC machine that is supported by the software, which is now getting as well, and costs half as much as an ARM chip, that's going to be the thing that ARM needs to watch for. Yeah. So they released one in the US. I actually have an SBC, like a small development board. It's not super fast, but it does everything that you could on a normal machine. I mean, it does just about any business app, like anything that Fedora can run, besides maybe some of like the games and the x86 specific software. Yeah, it's pretty good though.
So do you think these small, let's say, portable, let's say, development machines could be like just like have a RISC board? That's it?
Yeah, exactly. So in fact, over in the corner, I've got Raspberry Pi 4. I've got a Vision Star 5 1, which is the 2-core version of the RISC-V. It was the very first RISC-V SBC that I could get my hands on. And then a Banana Pi 5. And Banana Pi 5 basically is like a Raspberry Pi 4 times 3 or 4. It's got 16 gigs of RAM. It's basically a desktop in an ARM board. The RISC-V systems are not as fast yet, but they're going to get there. And in fact, because they're open source, they're not subject to any of the sanctions in China, right? So AliCloud, they're going to build their entire cloud in the future on RISC-V. They're about to release. Hopefully, I was on their waiting list to test out some of their RISC-V servers, but it's like, well, we can't use any Intel ISAs, we can't use ARM, we can't use any of these things that are restricted because we're under sanctions. But RISC-V is open source, so all their new chips that they're building internally, I shouldn't say all, but the bulk of their new chips, which get around the sanctions, are RISC-V. So they're cheaper and they're essentially not subject to the sanctions because it's open source. So it's going to be an interesting future. I don't know how it's going to pan out.
That's really cool. So do you think, like, I don't know, I haven't checked AliExpress for RISC-V, but like, is there already like mini PCs, let's say, running RISC? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
really cool.
They're coming together. So the Vision 5 2, I think, came out, and it has a 4-core, something like probably about 4 times as powerful as the one I have. But if you are curious, actually, in fact, in the Packard book, I use a QEMU, use the emulator to say, give me a virtual RISC-V machine. So you can run that and test that anywhere, right? You don't have to have the hardware either. But yeah, they're coming out. They just, like I said, released a laptop now. I don't know who makes it. I forget who makes it, but I think it's coming out of China. And it's essentially like the Pinebook. It's like a small RISC-based laptop that is experimental. Also, a lot of the software is questionable, so it's for developers. But there's, in fact, I'm going to RISC-V Summit in Santa Clara in November, 7th of November, to talk about how I backported a lot of the Go code, actually that HashiCorp had on RISC-V and how it worked out. Go code is surprisingly really flexible, really powerful and portable, right? So any of these apps that can be built from source, statically linked, they just run. As long as there's no bitwise logic like endian issues, it just runs. And that is going to be the future, right? So think back to the history of CPUs. You had, in the big days, you had Alpha, right? You had Spark, you had all these expensive server chips, and then you had desktop Intel CPUs. And in the world of Mac, you had PowerPC and 040, right? What went out in the end was Intel because it was cheaper, right? It wasn't necessarily better. Spark and Power were amazing chips. Power is still an amazing chip in architecture from IBM. But in the end, the mass-produced cheaper chips won. So Intel is now drastically losing business to ARM. ARM, I think, in the future will be worried about losing business to RISC-V because it is cheaper and it is easier to mass produce. So give it 10 years. Let's talk in 5 or 10 years and see how that came out. But yeah.
But as a software developer, because like myself, I didn't like think so much about these CPU architectures until like the other day. I got this M2 MacBook, and I was using my favorite like VirtualBox and I just like noticed that it doesn't work like well on ARM. So I thought, and I search around, and there is no, like, even the version they released for ARM is just buggy. So going back as a software developers, is there is it still difficult to write one software that works in all architectures?
Well, no, in fact, not at all, right? The trouble here with VirtualBox is that source is not as open as it used to be, right?
Mm.
So absolutely, if you have all the source code and a compiler to put it on the next platform, that works, right? Generally speaking. And one advantage, again, we have is QEMU, right? So QEMU is the universal emulator. You build it on any platform to emulate any other platform. And it's purely open source. So you get the source code, you run it, and it just works, right? So in fact, somebody called me the other day, well, I don't know, probably a year ago at HashiCorp and said, how do I run an emulator of a Raspberry Pi? I was like, well, that's easy. Look at QEMU, list the machines. Oh, Raspberry Pi 2, 3, or 4. I'm like, which one would you like to emulate? But yeah, like, especially in the world of Apple, they're not an open source company, right? They would rather have you use a Metal or sorry, not Metal, Parallels, right? Parallels.
Yeah, Barrels
So
is the best one out there, which is
yeah,
expensive, very
exactly.
expensive.
And that's
Yeah.
why, right? They don't care to have a free emulator on their hardware, right? There's money to be made. So, and they're very shrewd at business. That they're good at that. In fact, when I was a kid, I was a huge Apple fan. I had, oh my gosh, I was so fortunate. I had an uncle that worked for Motorola, and they ditched a bunch of Macs. So I had a pile of old Power Macs. I was a kid in heaven. And there was a time suddenly when I went to university and I had to focus on Linux, and I had there was a major shift to OS X at the time, and I kind of lost my Mac fandom. I'm like, well, I don't need this anymore. I've got PCs. And then suddenly Apple went from being an almost bankrupt company to the biggest company in the world. So Apple can thank me for suddenly suddenly projecting them to $1 trillion company, because I suddenly wasn't a fan anymore. I don't know. But they're very shrewd at business, right? They're not going to be open source with anything that they can get away with, which I don't blame. That's their business model, right? But yeah, there's still the options of QEMU and you're right, VirtualBox. If Oracle or whoever ported that now to ARM M2, that would be a big deal. Absolutely.
So for people who will still want to do or would like to test Linux on desktop, what's your advice? Is it Ubuntu, Fedora?
Well, I'm trying to be more flexible these days. Actually, in my earliest days, I started out with the worst possible. I started out with Gentoo in university days. Yeah. We were a very hardcore group of nerds at the university club, and like, why do I have to build a kernel from scratch? At that time it was Mandriva, or not Mandriva. It was one of the predecessors to Fedora. It was like the original Red Hat, and I just remember thinking, like, this is so tribal. You have to pick a distribution and never leave it. This is ridiculous. When I went into Red Hat, I was using Sabian, which is a pre-compiled Gentoo. Now everybody's into Arch, and all these low-level distros. For my daily runner, I need something that just works. So either Fedora or Ubuntu. I find that Fedora obviously is further upstream, and I love to test the latest features, right? It's ridiculous, but I get excited when a new kernel update comes in. Like, yay, it's the morning. What is in the new kernel? Because actually, there's a lot of new features that are pretty important. In fact, like for things like security, there's a major concept called hidden memory that was released in a version of the kernel that immediately hit Fedora. Like, okay, I can immediately test this out and use it, and recommend that customers use this, because this is a feature that has long been coming. And guess what? Ubuntu's LTS is still going to have the old kernel for a very long time, right? Any LTS distribution. Now, the experimental SBCs I've got over there, a lot of them are shipping with a variant of Ubuntu because it's got the market share from the vendors, right? And I'm happy to be flexible and use both. And in fact, as Fedora now goes upstream and abandons a lot of the old projects, I may go back and forth, right? Because Ubuntu will be more stable, I think. As it seems that one of my big shames, I think, the problem with the industry right now is anything that's not had a code update for a month is considered abandoned and obsolete. Like, Xorg, X11, the Windows display system for Linux is not as active as it used to be. Let's get rid of it and rewrite. Like, just because it hasn't been touched in so long doesn't mean it's not useful, right? It's stable. Yeah. These projects are finally mature, and anything that's deemed mature in the community, unfortunately, is deemed as needs replacing. So I don't know. If you want something that just works, stick with Ubuntu, right? If you want something that helps you professionally again, Fedora all the way.
Yeah. I remember this is actually the reason why I switched Fedora back in the university, because I know the server market is Red Hat, right? So yes. I had to be familiar, Still nowadays, even now, like at least in Saudi, in the Gulf, like server side, still not, still majority Red Hat. So still, you need to be familiar with like, let's say, Yum based and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yum and DNF. I'm glad you said Yum because now it's DNF. But now I know exactly what the last time you used Red Hat was.
Yeah.
Now this is funny too because when you sit down at a terminal, it like even at Red Hat we had a bunch of Java coders, right? We had acquired a company of Java engineers from called Amentra, and they were Windows users. They like to use Windows and code Java in JBoss apps, and I can always tell when I sit down the new guy at the keyboard what he's been using his whole life, what he or she has been using their whole life, right? IP config. Oh, why won't this show me my IP? Okay, you're a Windows guy, right? IF config. Okay, you're a Ubuntu guy. IP-A. Okay, you're a Fedora guy, like, or a Fedora person, right? So, yeah, it can tell the first typo somebody makes in a command what your background is. Like, oh yeah, I wrote apt on a Fedora box. Okay, well there you go.
Do you think they still should be like board like, because let's say like if I touch now Fedora and like I say like Yum update, it doesn't work. It's like what happened when they switched the system D, right? Like,
yes,
I think kind of like you should like they give you the experience. Okay, I've only touched it in 10 years. Just show me the old commands, okay? Make sure
yes,
it works.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the Fedora community's job, right? So we're actually, now that I've been involved a bit more, it's really interesting to see how somebody reports that right away. There's a fix. In fact, there's you're familiar with Rawhide, right? So Rawhide is the literally leading edge of everything in the community compiled today. It's like a nightly build of all of Fedora, right? Latest kernel, latest everything from Linus Torvalds. So if Linus and the Linux Foundation release a new kernel update, it'll be probably a week or two before it makes it into Fedora. It could be months, maybe a couple of months until it makes it into mainstream Fedora, and then Ubuntu and such later. But there's a kernel testing day every time there's a new kernel, and you can volunteer in the Fedora community to say, okay, I tested the latest kernel. Here's what exploded on my machine. And they'll fix that before it actually gets released, right, to the community. So whereas the other projects largely rely on the upstream community to say, okay, this is stable. We've tested it already. We'll use it. Fedora, it's fun to be at the leading edge. And literally, like sometimes I found myself waiting for the new kernel features to land. Like, okay, well, this is going to happen now, right? This is going to happen now. Like, I was going to test out and review a new Intel GPU. Like, okay, I'm waiting for this to hit now. Like, it's ridiculous to think about, but yeah, I mean, you can really be wherever you want to be in the software stream. And I love to be upstream. I love to be working with the latest and greatest because I don't want to be surprised later in front of a customer, right? Oh, what happened here? Like, that's not what a customer wants to hear.
Absolutely, absolutely. John, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for being here today. Any closing thoughts, any advice, anything you would like to share before we close up?
No, I think thank you so much. This has been fun. Shukran. Unbelievable. And again, hopefully I will make it back down there sometime soon. So I don't know when. I know that I'm not going this year, but HashiCorp sent a bunch of delegates to JITEC. So I think we will I shouldn't say we, HashiCorp will have a presence there. So yeah, I hope to make it back down there for that someday though as well. So, well, wonderful. Thank you, Abdul Rahman. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you. Cheers. We'll stick to you soon.